All right, folks, you ready for this? We're going deep on worms this time.
Worms.
Yeah, worms. You guys sent in this YouTube video. Uh, Large-scale worm farm, just getting started. From uh, West Mountain Organic.
Okay.
And this thing, it is massive. I mean, in-ground, multiple sections, like a whole worm city.
Wow.
Yeah, right. So we're going to try to figure out what we can learn from this setup about, large-scale worm farming
Yeah.
and just the crazy world of these composting champs.
I'm intrigued. What makes this setup stand out to you?
Well, first of all, I think it really shows that, worm composting isn't like just some simple little thing.
Right.
The scale of this operation,
Mm.
thousands and thousands of worms,
Yeah.
need planning and infrastructure and management. It's a lot more than people probably think.
I see. So it's not just a matter of throwing some scraps in a bin and calling it a day.
Not even close.
Yeah.
And right away, the farmer shows us his system in the ground. He's got it divided into sections,
Okay.
including, get this, a nursery pile. Yeah, for breeding. So it's like finished compost, animal manure, sawdust, and straw all mixed together.
A worm fertility spa.
Exactly. And oh, he started with 20,000 worms.
2,000.
Red wigglers and European night crawlers, and they've been multiplying like crazy.
That's a lot of worms. Is there a reason for the mix of species?
I bet there is. Red wigglers are like the eating machines. They reproduce really fast. And then the European night crawlers, they're bigger. They burrow deeper, and that helps aerate the compost. So he's got a good team there.
So he's got the speed and the aeration covered. Clever. But all those worms, they must generate a lot of,
Yeah, your castings.
Right.
You can't just leave the worms in their own, waste forever.
Definitely not. You have to separate the worms from the castings to keep the farm healthy and productive, and that looks like a job and a half with this setup.
Tell me about it. This guy's serious. Multiple screens, custom-built sifting boxes, like a whole factory.
Wow. What a production. So he's obviously putting a lot of effort into keeping those worms happy.
Yeah, and he actually even talks about getting a rotary sifter eventually.
Oh, to make it even more efficient.
Yeah, he wants to keep things running smoothly and, minimize disruption for the worms.
Well, that's definitely a good sign. It seems like he really respects his worms.
Oh, yeah, big time. And that comes up when he starts talking about their behavior, too. Like, did you know European night crawlers like to hang out at the top of the bedding, just below the dry layer?
I didn't know that. That's interesting. So there's even nuance to where they like to be.
Right. It can't just be random. There's got to be a reason.
Yeah, there have to be. I'm curious, what does he think causes that preference?
Well, he actually says that if the bedding gets too wet, they get all lazy. But when it's drier, they're more active. So maybe they're finding that sweet spot for moisture up there.
Oh, that makes sense. So it's not just about providing food, it's about creating the right environment.
Yeah, it's way more complex than I thought. Like a whole ecosystem down there.
And we're just getting started. Wait till you hear how he harvests those castings.
Oh, yeah, the worm scaring method, right.
You've done your research. So instead of digging around and maybe hurting them, he uses light to drive them deeper down.
Yeah, so he can scoop the castings off the top without bothering them too much.
Clever. So it sounds like he's really dedicated to minimizing their stress.
He is. He actually even says, as the farm gets bigger and there's more and more worms, he might not be able to save every single one.
Oh,
Uh,
I see. It's like he's wrestling with that balance between efficiency and, being completely ethical.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you think. Okay, so we've talked about the setup, the sifting, even,
Yeah.
where they like to hang out.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the food?
Right, the food.
I mean, we're talking like thousands and thousands of worms. What are they actually eating? And how do you even keep up with that?
Well, it's all about giving them the right stuff, right? Organic matter, but it's got to be broken down, easy for them to digest.
Okay.
So he really emphasizes, finely sifted material. They can get through that quickly.
Makes sense, yeah.
And he's really specific about spreading it evenly throughout the farm, too.
Oh, so they're all getting their fair share.
Exactly. Consistent feeding, consistent harvesting.
Smart. But what about the moisture? We were talking about that before, right? Too much, they get lazy, too little, and, they dry out. How do you get that balance right, especially with so many worms?
Yeah, good point. That's where the landscape fabric comes in.
Oh, okay.
He covers the whole farm with it. It helps keep the moisture in, but it still lets the farm breathe.
So it's like a giant worm terrarium.
Yeah, exactly. He's created this perfect little environment for them.
Well, perfect for composting too, right? We want those castings. That's the whole point.
Right. And to keep track of everything, the farmer keeps really detailed records.
Oh, wow. So it's like data-driven worm farming.
Pretty much. He's tracking the temperature, moisture levels, everything.
Yeah.
Writes it all down every day.
To see what's working best, I guess.
Exactly. It helps them spot any patterns, make adjustments, really dial things in.
That reminds me, you said he got those moisture readings wrong at first.
Oh, yeah, that was funny. He thought the gauge was showing percentages. He was aiming for like 50% moisture.
Oh.
Turns out it was measuring something else entirely.
Yikes. Good thing he figured it out, though.
Yeah, even experienced farmers make mistakes. That's why those records are so important.
True, true. But hold on, we've been talking about the farm itself, but where did he even get 20,000 worms to start with? Did he order them like online or something?
Not quite as simple as that, although you can buy worms online. But finding a supplier that can handle that kind of volume and good quality worms, that's tricky.
Really? I would have thought with everyone composting these days, worms would be everywhere.
You'd think so, but
Okay.
it's tougher than it sounds. He even mentioned maybe doing a whole video reviewing different worm farms he ordered from.
Oh, that would be cool, like a worm vendor showdown.
Yeah, seeing which ones have the best, wigglers and shipping times.
I would totally watch that. But okay, say you've got your worms. Do you just like dump them all on the farm and that's it?
No, there's a process. Remember that nursery pile we talked about?
Oh, right.
That's where the new worms go first. It's like a special little area to help them get used to their new home and, more importantly, start reproducing.
Ah, so it's like a worm welcome center and a breeding ground all in one.
Exactly. From a business perspective, it's pretty clever. More worms, more castings, more profit.
It all makes sense. But we've been talking a lot about the good stuff. Are there any downsides to worm farming?
Downsides.
Yeah, like what if they escape? Do I suddenly have thousands of worms all over my backyard?
That's a fair question. It's definitely something to think about. But he seems to have taken steps to stop that, like the landscape fabric. That acts as a barrier, keeps them contained.
Right.
And he also mentioned they don't like light, so keeping the farm covered helps.
So combination of physical barriers and, understanding worm behavior. But let's be real. Some are going to get out right. What happens then?
Well, most composting worms aren't really built to survive in the wild. They need that controlled environment.
So they probably wouldn't last long out there.
Most likely not. They'd become bird food or something.
Okay, that's good to know. But it makes me wonder, is it even ethical, to keep all these worms in a bin just for our benefit?
That's a good question. It's something to think about for sure. I mean, we are profiting off of their work in a way.
Yeah.
But they evolved to do this,
Yeah.
right? Break down organic matter. They're not being forced to do anything they wouldn't naturally do.
That's true. We're just giving them a place to do it.
Exactly. And we get something out of it, too. It's like a partnership. We give them food and shelter, and they give us compost to grow our plants.
So it's a win-win.
I think so, yeah. But like any good partnership, we got to make sure their needs are met. We got to take care of them.
I agree. It's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Using their natural talents, but making sure they're okay, too.
And that's what I like about this video. You can see the farmer's always thinking about that. Getting the most out of the farm, but also respecting the worms and the environment.
He's really walking that line, isn't he? Between what works and what's right.
Yeah, and that's what makes this whole thing so interesting. It's not just about the science of composting. It's about understanding nature and working with it.
Yeah, I get it now. I'm starting to see why you love this worm stuff so much. It's not just about the worms. It's about a whole way of thinking.
You got it.
But hold on, we're not done yet. We still haven't talked about that rotary sifter and his record-keeping system. That's got to be fascinating.
Oh, there's plenty more to uncover.
And the pH levels. We didn't even get into that.
Oh, good point. So much more to explore. Looks like we'll need a part 3 to cover it all.
Okay, so we're back. And I'm still kind of blown away by all this worm stuff.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is. Like, who knew there was so much to think about when it comes to worms?
It really shows how complex nature can be, even with something that seems pretty simple.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of complex, remember that rotary sifter he was talking about?
Oh, yeah, that thing. He's really serious about making this farm efficient.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine sifting through all those castings by hand. What does that rotary thing even do anyway?
Well, picture a giant drum, right?
Okay.
And it's spinning. And it's got all these different size screens on it. So as it spins, the fine compost that falls through the small screens and the bigger stuff and the worms, they stay in the drum.
So it's like separating everything automatically.
Yeah, exactly. Like a worm-powered sorting machine.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
It is. And it's good for the worms, too. Less disruption, less stress.
Right. They can just keep on composting.
Exactly. And remember all that data he was tracking? Temperature, moisture?
Oh, yeah.
That's all part of making things run smoothly, too. Helps him keep the environment just right for the worms.
And he wouldn't have caught that mistake with the moisture readings if he wasn't keeping track of all that stuff.
Exactly. Even the best of us mess up sometimes. That's why those records are so important. You can learn from your mistakes.
True that. And since we're talking about all the little details, I'm curious about the pH levels.
Oh, pH.
Yeah, he didn't really get into that in the video, but I know it's important for plants, so it must matter for compost too, right?
Absolutely. pH is key. It affects how fast things break down, what kind of bacteria are in there, the whole deal.
So what's the ideal pH for a worm farm?
You want it slightly acidic to neutral, around 6.5 to 7.
Okay, and how do you make sure it stays there?
He didn't say in the video, but there's a few tricks you can use, like crushed eggshells that can help reduce acidity, or if you need to raise the pH, you can add oak leaves, pine needles, things like that.
Wow, so it's really about balancing everything, isn't it? All these different factors all working together.
It is. It's amazing. It's like its own little world down there.
Yeah, and it makes you realize how much work goes into creating that perfect environment for the worms and for the compost.
Absolutely. And there was one thing he said that really stuck with me.
What's that?
Well, right now, he's saving every worm he can, like during the sifting and all that. But he said as the farm gets bigger and he's got, millions of worms, he might not be so careful anymore.
Oh, I see. So when things get really big, it's harder to worry about every single worm.
Yeah, and it makes you think, can you keep that same level of care when you're dealing with that kind of scale?
That's a good question. It's like a challenge, right?
Hmm.
Can we stay ethical even when things get huge?
Exactly. And it's not just about worm farming. It's something we all have to think about. As we try to live more sustainably, can we still care for the individual even when we're dealing with the whole planet?
That's deep.
It is. It's a big question.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it for today. This worm farm deep dive, wow, I've learned a lot.
Me too. It's been fascinating.
It really makes you appreciate all the little things, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And even if you're not ready to start your own worm mega farm, just paying attention to nature, asking questions, staying curious. That's what it's all about.
Well said. That's all for this week's deep dive. We'll see you next time.